Hot trumpet down to get everybody's attention. Welcome everybody. Sorry we're a little crowded, but David said he wanted a big audience, so we've supplied that. We'll buy some extra chairs, I guess, for next time. I'm Ryan Wheeler. I'm the director here at the Peabody Institute. Our speaker this evening is Dr. David Shane Lowry, who is a professor at the University of Southern Maine. Prior to that, he was at MIT, where he was involved in admissions and their anthropology program as a fellow.
Not so much admissions, but
okay. Forthcoming book from the University of Nebraska Press is Lumbee Pipelines. David is also a citizen of the Lumbee Nation. And so that's coming out next year, 2025. I think you can pre-order. So thank you for being here tonight. I'm going to turn things over to David. Do you want me to go ahead?
Yes,
play that? Okay. I will try to make technology work.
Well, tonight we have an I-team investigation involving stolen land and stolen dreams. A couple says thieves targeted their conquered property and actually sold it.
Yeah, and the new buyers are building a house on the land. So how did this happen and who's responsible? WBZ Chief Investigator Cheryl Fiandaga went looking for answers.
The Cherokees cannot believe their eyes, watching as a house is being built on their land that thieves stole right from under them.
They stole our dream. They stole our property. They took a mortgage on it. They're building a house on it.
Gone are some of the beautiful trees that the Cherokees wanted to keep, and the house is nothing like what they imagined.
That's not where we want to build the house.
It was an elaborate scheme. Thieves targeted the vacant land and, pretending to be Hala, emailed a local realtor and put the property on the market. The Cherokees live in South Carolina and had no idea their land was up for sale.
It's unbelievable.
Within months, it sold for $525,000, less than the asking price and much less than the $1 million it was actually worth. The money sent to a bank account and shipped overseas.
You know, a quick $500,000 for a counterfeit driver's license and passport and sending a couple emails. You know, that's a day's work.
The Cherokees bought the vacant land in this upscale Concord neighborhood 33 years ago and planned to build a family home on it when they retired. The couple only found out about the fraudulent sale when Hala called the town hall looking for their tax bill.
And I said, I never sold my land. We were so shocked.
It was shocking. No one ever met or talked to the fraudsters who pretended to be Hala. The thieves signed all of the closing documents electronically or sent them through the mail.
The minute I saw this deed, I knew it was a forgery. You just can tell by looking at it. Just the handwriting, it looks off. There were so many other red flags.
Red flags that the broker and both the buyer and seller's attorneys missed. One of the biggest, the identification the thieves provided. A South Carolina driver's license that looks nothing like a real one, and a U.S. passport, both with the same photo. Impossible, since license photos are taken at the Department of Motor Vehicles, and the woman in the fake IDs looks nothing like Hala.
This is disaster. It's not only for us, for other people. Like, it's gonna happen to them.
The Cherokees are now suing the lawyers and the buyer and want more than just their property and money. They want the fraudsters caught.
They're definitely going to get their property back. I think the only question is, you know, what do we do about the house? There's kind of two ways to go. They can deed the property back to the owners, or there can be some sort of financial settlement.
These people need to be punished.
There actually is a chance that the thieves could be caught in this case. The Cherokees and their attorney tell the I-team that the FBI has opened an investigation into the fraudulent sale. Cheryl Fiandaga, WBZ News.
now as we're transitioning to the PowerPoint, somebody please volunteer. No right answer to their questions. What was being stolen? And who was it being stolen from? Stolen for thinking, the land and the hunting. So the owners and people that were testifying in the news story. Rights to land. How would that be determined, the rights to land? Um, so there was a couple, man, man, woman, wife and husband, I'm assuming. She stated that there were fraudsters, they needed to be caught. Who were the fraudsters? Yeah. I asked my students, I showed this actually this semester to students in one of my classes, and I asked them, who originally owned the land? This couple? Who was it? Yes, please.
It was some American Indians in general. It was American Indians in general.
American.
Some specific tribe.
Okay. So why was that discussed in this news story?
Because right now it's owned by these people, and I guess because they don't really, they try to kind of move the focus on the fact that it's Indian land, the fact that it's like someone, like, to the fact that it's about property rights. So they move the focus.
So what I'm hearing and what you're suggesting is that it used to be owned by Native American, Indigenous peoples, but now it focuses on those particular people in the story, their rights to land.
I think that it's just become so normal for us to, or for people in America to forget that this land was originally owned and inhabited by Indigenous people, that it's not something we regularly think about when we think about property rights. It's not something that would come like first and foremost to someone's mind. Like, the only reason I probably would have thought about it is because, like, in the context of this talk, which is about stolen this land. But otherwise, like, I saw that news story outside of this talk, and without that context, I probably wouldn't think about it. And I don't think many people would have thought about it with the way we're taught about America.
Who is we? You said how we are taught. Who is we?
We, as in like the American people who have grown up and been in America and been.
I have a question. Were those couple Indigenous people or?
I'm assuming not, and based on accent, for example, the way they spoke, they were from another country, and you do some kind of social calculus. I don't think they were from America generally, and I don't think they necessarily lived there, in particular Indigenous. That's a good question though. Are they Indigenous? One of my mentors, 2 years ago, I was a fellow in Native American Studies, distinguished fellow in Native American Studies at MIT in 2122. He was from the Lumbee tribe of Washington. He says a statement like that was made, like a question, are these people Indigenous? And he says, wait a minute, we need to be very careful how we answer that. Everyone's Indigenous somewhere. White folks in this room, your ancestors were from France or Italy or Scotland or Ireland, you all are Indigenous to Europe. Now, my elder sort of mentor friend during this conversation said, the question that you all should ask, if we understand that everybody's Indigenous from somewhere, why did your family leave? And why did they come here? And why in the context of their leaving their Indigenous places and communities and peoplehoods did they take over other Indigenous people's land? So that's the question, maybe that is sitting here in the room. It's the elephant in the room, and you're right. If most people in this room would watch that without the context of sort of the advertisement for this conversation, I haven't even really started talking yet. You would have never really thought about, wait a minute, I need to really consider, do they really own the land? Now, I want us to hang our heart, our emotions, our intellectual abilities, hang everything that makes us who we are on the statement that the lady made, the woman made. She said, I want the perpetrators to some, I'm paraphrasing, I want the perpetrators to be caught. I want some sense of justice. And so if, based on what you all are saying, based on sort of the advertisement for this talk, if we know and understand that all of this is stolen Indian land, who are the perpetrators and how will they be caught? Any responses?
Perpetrators were the colonists of the land, but since they were the victims in the general war over the land, they are not really going to be
So that's the tension in the realm. That's the tension in American history. It's the tension in the United States. Is we know that the entire nation is still in Indian land. Sorry. What's they doing? We know we know generally how to describe the perpetrators. We terms like colonizers, immigrants who are not from the United States, people who were agents of foreign governments that were outside of the over 600 nations that did define what is not the United States and still define. We didn't go anywhere. We were purposely killed in many ways, but we're still here. So anyway, with that question in mind, the talk that I'm going to give today, which is more of a conversation, is the end begins with stolen Indian land. And I purposely borrowed from the motto, or one of the mottos. I think we have two, right? One of the mottos of Phillips Academy, which is a Greek, basically term or Greek statement that translates into the end begins with the beginning. And I forcefully insert here that the beginning is not some ambiguous beginning. It is actually the long history and an ongoing sort of non-conversation about how all this is stolen land. Was there a clicker? Oh, yeah.
I think the clicker's right here.
Right here? Okay. Oh, there you go. All right. So I wanted, before I get to what this means, two things happened today. I was with my wife and some colleagues at the Indigenous Peoples Day in Newton, which is in Newton, Massachusetts. As we were helping set up tents, the police, the sheriff's deputy for the Middlesex County Police, or the Sheriff's Department, escorted a parade through where we were setting up tents. They were blazing horns and flying the Italian flag along with the U.S. flag. And we all sat around saying, why? Would they have ridden through a parade at like a Martin Luther King Day celebration with Italian flags and sort of flared their horns and made a scene? If it was Cinco de Mayo, would they have done the same thing? Were they going to go back to their home communities, whether it was in Newton or Worcester or anywhere else in Massachusetts, and fly their flags and blow their horns like they did this morning? All of us agreed that no, this blowing of the horns and this flying of the Italian flag was directed to all the indigenous peoples who very peacefully and within the rules of Newton decided to acquire the space for this one particular 8-hour period and celebrate indigenous peoples. But there were a lot of people there in their quietness and they're not talking about what had just happened. There were a lot of people there that sort of, for me, verified something that I've known for a long time. We as indigenous peoples, we endure a lot. We just endure it. We hear stories like I just showed you about land being stolen from homeowners, and we're never brought up as the original owners of the land. Why? So number two, not only did sort of that happen this morning with the flaring of horns and flying the Italian flags and so on and so forth. The Nobel Prize Committee, based in Sweden, I believe, awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics to 3 white faculty members. One of them was at MIT, and this particular faculty member is, we've gotten into some contestation over the years about how the economics department at MIT won't hire American and Native American indigenous faculty. So what are these faculty, these scholars who got the Nobel Prize study? They studied money and prosperity and wealth. But there was no indication that that economics is a discipline in general. Their discussion should be about how all wealth and wealth requirement in the United States is from the beginning based on the death of American and Native American indigenous land. And my question to you is, why do we continue to validate economic scholars who quite literally ignore how all economic things in the United States and more generally in the world revolve around stolen Indian land? Right now, Israel and Ukraine and Iran and China and all of these other countries wouldn't be able to fire rockets without wealth that they've gotten through the economies of weapons that were funded in the United States from stolen Indian land since 1492. When Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Do y'all young people still sing that in like kindergarten? In 1492, yeah, it's kind of scary that that's become a nursery rhyme for kids still to this day, same. So, with that said, all of the United States is stolen in the land, as I've said like 7 times already. This is not America. It's not Columbia. Columbia used to be the other name for America. People say, well, Columbus didn't start with the United States. Why did people who were the original governors of the colonial United States call the United States Columbia? It's embedded in the title of our capital, Washington, D.C., Washington, the District of Columbia. And my question at this point for you all here at Andover is, why, with the United States being stolen in England, why isn't it returning? Colonialism is the process through which indigenous land all around the world is stolen, not just Indian land here in the United States, but indigenous land all across the world. Colonialism might be defined as an ongoing pornographic desire for newness. The entire United States is attached to concepts like founded and established. Terms that you will find on signs like this as you're entering places like Boston. In this concept of colonialism, you take whatever exists before, what exists indigenously, and you begin a path forward or into a future in which you do not have to account for how new opportunities and new ways of seeing yourself must by definition erase and dismiss what is already present. I love it when people tell me stories about how agriculture started in like the 1500s with Puritans and other folks from England. I'm like, nah, people from England didn't know how to farm. The fact is, indigenous peoples, American Indian peoples, Native American peoples from over 500, you could argue 600 American Indian nations, they had engineered the landscape of the United States. However, the story, the folklore of America at that point, starting in the 1500s, but especially as you inch towards the 1700s, was that America was virgin territory for Europeans and other immigrants have increasingly over the decades and the centuries to properly use the virgin territory. American Indian, Native American peoples had already been using it and using it well. The city that you call home, Andover, the city that you call home, Andover, had a seal on the flag. Take a look at it. They show you the cartoonish image of an Indian man. Perhaps this is supposed to be the image of a Massachusetts traveling. And associated words incorporated May 6, 1646. If you go to, and we all use the internet, right? If you go to the wiki page for Andover, there's a super simple explanation of what led to this incorporation, including a story of a payment to a sachem from the Massachusetts tribe who, according to your Andover stories, eagerly sold off the land and water for a few dollars in common to be able to fish in this area. This mirrors the story of Manhattan in New York. Actually, let's keep this. This mirrors the story of Manhattan in New York. Last year, when visiting the National Museum of the American Indian in New York City, I noticed an exhibit that explained how Manhattan was obtained. There's a popular story that the island, which is now New York, was purchased by the Dutch for $24. But what evidence do we have that this was the case? We have no evidence. Letters from a Dutch colonizer named Peter Shaken is the only paper trail for such a sale to another Dutch colonizer named Peter Menuet. Yet, this kind of myth of this sale became the birth certificate for New York City. In this moment, we aren't forcing American Indians to prove, and we shouldn't force in any way, American Indians, Native Americans to prove that our ancestors were here. No, rather, the pressure should be on colonial occupiers, even people in this room, to prove that you have a right to be here. In Massachusetts, various towns and cities are the direct product of bounties that were paid to white men and their families who assassinated, murdered, particular American Indian leaders. Other towns and cities began as praying towns. That's what they were called, praying towns, which originally served as prisons or reservations for American Indian peoples from several tribal nations in Massachusetts. I'm now working with journalists, and actually I saw him today at the event where the time flags were being flown by the honkers. I saw him, a journalist, who was writing a story about this, how there's a direct correlation between bounties on the head of certain native leaders, which led to particular large sums of cash, which were the center of the capitalistic sort of currency center of the emergence of these towns in Massachusetts. Indeed, this topic seems a little more potent or timely when considering the protests across the United States over the past year and a year and a half, especially at Columbia University. Columbia is named after Christopher Columbus, and it falls in line with this longer history of America unofficially being called Columbia. While many people, including students and faculty, asked for Columbia to oppose Israel's occupation of and violence within Palestine, I noticed that none of these students or faculty suggested that Columbia return lands to the Lenape or the Delaware tribe, who are the indigenous people, the place where Columbia University is. The political war between Israel and Palestine and Iran and Hamas, etc., the battles to define genocide halfway across the world, despite literally rooted in a celebration of genocide in the Western Hemisphere and in particular the United States, through acts of saying over and over words like Columbia, and Columbus, and Washington, D.C., to the point where you all, and watch the news, don't know whose land it is. You don't ask whose land it is. There's a question here that I want to ask you all, and I want you to think about it. Maybe at the end, as we talk, we can answer that question. Why is genocide used to house or to create the conditions for fights against genocide? Why is it that we so easily in the United States can wear Palestinian cloths around our neck and talk about people being murdered in hundreds and perhaps thousands now over a year? And yet now here, as we're settled in the United States, as you all, as your community is settled in the United States, there's no commentary on the pandemic of missing and murdered indigenous women in the United States. Why is that? That is essentially what is taking place for anyone in the United States who attempts to advocate for the humanities of people elsewhere across the world. You are sitting in genocide, trying to advocate and push against genocide, trying to squash or eliminate genocide, when your very presence in the United States in various ways is because of genocide. So I have 2 book projects in progress. The first one, which will be out in August, is Lumbee Pipelines, American Indian Movement and the Residue of Southern Colonialism. The second of these my books that I'm working on is called Indigenous MIT Must Rescue Science and Technology from American Genocide. Lumbee Pipelines, the first book, makes the case that American Indian, Native American peoples use genocidal conditions to create opportunities that help us out of states of genocide and provides pathways to life and opportunity for other American Indian and non-American Indian peoples. One of the unfortunate stories is that we, Lumbee people from my tribe, use states of our own dehumanization as a cover or a veneer for our pursuits of profit, education, and well-being. I suggest in all this work to go everywhere and do everything for everybody else, we, Lumbee people, and I think American Indians more generally, are not allowed to center ourselves on fixing conditions of genocide in the United States. Like the people at the IPD event today knew, there is the endurance of racism, dehumanization, mocking, and we just stay silent in many ways. There's really no conversation. We, in some ways, it just subconsciously expect to be treated that way. In Indigenous MIT, my second book, I carry this conversation a bit further within a discussion of dual processes. Within dual processes that I call corpus and corporation. Massachusetts, the state commonwealth you live in, started as a theocracy whose whole mission was to rip apart the corpus, the bodies, and the identities of American Indian, Native American nations. Hundreds of them. And this dismembering of American Indian peoples, colonial authorities and entrepreneurs less and less wrapped in a Jesus costume. And I say that they're not Christians, they weren't Christians, they were merely plain Christians. In this Jesus costume, they created or invented states of inquiry, scientific endeavors, sometimes you might call it, that use conditions of genocide to address conditions of genocide, but not truly repair them. That is why, as you can see here, this is like the official kind of label for the Institute. That is why the Koch brothers, who notoriously placed toxic waste into various communities and stole oil controlled by American Indians, especially if you watched Killers of the Flower Moon, they stole oil from those cities. It's not a combination, they stole oil from So now those Koch brothers have a well-funded cancer research center on MIT's campus. There is no life at MIT. There has never been any life in Cambridge since the days when Harvard University began in 1630. What we are witnessing is an economy of taking the residues of genocide, the aftermath of stolen Indian land, and the purposeful disappearing of American Indian peoples and authorities, shall we say sovereignties, and creating tools that are somehow supposed to treat and fix genocide. All the work of Harvard and MIT is superficial. They make us assume, I should say, that life is supposed to come out of a petri dish of death. And that is impossible, and that's what I argue in my second book. That's impossible. You can't create life out of death. As such, colonialism in the United States is a set of economic and intellectual processes that make it necessary for big, bold stories to begin the story of us, the United States. These stories distract us from death. Various immigrant communities that make up the United States depend on fantastic origin stories that make their presences both okay and morally justified. And I'm not just talking about new immigrants, I'm talking about old immigrants, those of you who call it like in Maine, they say, we're Mainers. No, you keep on stolen Indian land. You're on stolen Wabanaki land. These stories distract us from death. They distract us from the presence of people who attempt in various ways to morally justify their presences on stolen indigenous land. They believe in the American dream. And you all heard this, right? It's about the American dream. They make cases that what they work for and afford in the United States is theirs. It's all theirs. Like the couple with the house stolen, that was theirs. They own that land and they want the people who stole it captured. They are never forced to address it all as stolen Indian land in life, in relationships, in power, and authority. See, for example, the story of the family, which I wrote now, but we already watched it. So the story of the family in Concord, Mass, who found their home stolen. The journalist in that, the report that you just watched, the journalist focused in on the fear and anxiety that this family had when they found out that their identities were stolen and used to create a situation where their home and associated land were stolen. And they asked a general sort of underlying question, how did this happen? Well, it happened because all being stolen land, the United States has been set up as a giant Ponzi scheme in which generation after generation over the last 400 years or so have been persuaded that they deserve land and space and time in the United States. These are feelings which have been solidified in constitutional, and I believe you said constitutional legal, solidified in constitutional legal processes that make everyone focus on the business of real estate. I always have problems with people who use real estate because within the business of real estate, there's never any ethical conversations about what people are doing when they buy, sell. In actuality, I call it fake estate. It's not real estate, it's fake estate. It is a distraction from ongoing death of the land and waters and ecologies of over 600 American nations. This fake estate is captured in certain linguistic terms, such as the words public and private. Take, for example, this map, which is called Map of Indian Territory. It describes lands, public lands, lands that essentially in Oklahoma were doing two things in the late 1800s. They were being used to politically and physically disappear American Indian nations. That's why Oklahoma, on the license plate, if you've ever driven across the Midwest, you see Oklahoma tags, some of them still say Indian land. It was created as a repository for Native nations from the West, East, North, and South to be kind of put away. There were two things, and I'm not going to take time to read the letters for the sake of time. But there are two things going on, and we have the Ocean Map Library at USM, University of Southern Maine, and I was asked to provide a commentary on this. But there's basically a journalist up here who says, listen, we don't know what you're doing with the land of Oklahoma. You know, who's it for? Is it for more and more increasingly larger communities of American Indian peoples? What's going on? And this journal And this general, whose last name is, I think, Boudinot, maybe his name is French. He provides a long response in which he basically says several things. One of them is, we're making it so that those Indian people cannot make any claim to their land. And so setting this up as a public space, right? So the various Native nations were being placed into, he said, we're making it and we're codifying this public so that ultimately we aren't morally responsible for stripping American Indians of land to then reserve or sort of quarantine American Indian people. So this is what I actually say as I'm responding to this. I said, these letters and the associated map illustrate what I call spring cleaning in the 19th century of America. The Emancipation Proclamation, which supposedly freed all slaves from chattel slavery between 1862 and 1865, also freed the federal government or the U.S. government of resources or with resources for continued genocidal campaigns against American Indian peoples. This included continued relocation of American Indian peoples from the east, west, south, and north into what is called Indian Territory. Indian Territory became a colonial receptacle. American Indians thrown into this receptacle were treated like America's trash, garbage, and rubbish. I have to use all the words so everybody can understand what I'm talking about. Trash, garbage. Meanwhile, white and black peoples who were both citizens of the United States across the United States in the aftermath of the Emancipation Proclamation and the Civil War. As Abraham Lincoln freed black peoples, he authorized the wiping out and genocide of American Indian peoples. There's actually a really good skit by the 1491s, the Native American comedy troupe. It's called Lincoln is a Douche. It shows a white person going up saying, yeah, that's Lincoln, he's morally okay. He's showing us the right way forward. Black person comes up, yes, he freed my ancestors. I feel really good about that. And the Indian person just stands there and he's listening to Lincoln make some snide remark about the Indians can now all hang, which is what he said about the colored people in the Northern Plains. And the response from the Indian guy is, Lincoln's a douche. And that was his response. Because Indian people have no love for Lincoln because Lincoln, as he was freeing black peoples, was targeting with precision Indian peoples to move us out of the way of American prosperity and movement to the West. So, in the wake of Lincoln's democracy, American Indian people were considered a stumbling block for interference to the full settling of the United States. American Indian people were not allowed to be citizens of the United States until 1924, about 50 years later, after all this had taken place. Indian bodies were deemed wild, and our lands, Indian lands, were deemed public. Now, I have to ask you in this particular point, what does the term public mean? In the Boudinot, I'll pronounce the name in French, in the Boudinot letters, the term public seems like a common sense term applied to the securing and planning of surplus land in the United States of America. However, the term public was a powerful linguistic tool. On one hand, it was a way of saying stolen without confessing that theft has occurred. The idea was that if the government called something public, they, the government, could not accuse of self-reporting that something. That something was ideally for the good of all peoples. And that's where the American dream came from. The government hoarding Indian land, everybody can come into America, and within this idea of the American dream can go. So, in the world of, the United States officials making lands public, in his world, making lands public was a way of laundering or concealing the theft of Indian lands. It was a way to make everyone in the United States, including new immigrants, responsible to and for America's work to free the land from Indian occupancy, which was a term that he actually used in his response. We want to free the land from Indian occupancy, and we want to free the land from the title that American Indian Native Americans peoples can have to the land. Now, some of you very bright, brilliant students and faculty might say, and community members, might say, didn't Indian people have treaties? There were treaties, weren't there? Yes, but there were these treaties, any treaty, and I'm talking about any treaty that was written between the federal government or even state governments and American Indians were written and signed as a way of, as a medium of alleviating tensions for the benefit of those governments as they planned their takeover of American Indian lands, waters, and spaces. Indeed, treaties were not proposed by the federal government with intentions of ever honoring them. While Boudinot, who's responding to the journalist, makes it seem like American Indian tribal nations sold their lands of their own free will within the treaty signing process. The opposite was true. Treaties in early colonial America were signed under duress, under the pressure of the colonial gun. What Boudinot says is ceded land, and this is the word he uses, all of the land is ceded. It was in reality unceded, it was stolen. Today, what defines the United States of America is the idea that, quote, the Indian title has been extinguished. The fact is, the Indian title has not been extinguished or forfeited. What does make the what does that make the United States in the context of the fact that one has never been ceded? The United States of America and its various branches of government, such as the Supreme Court, exist to dampen or squash American Indian, Native American claims to the United States of America, or more precisely, the United States of America exists to oppose American Indian sovereign control of land, water, and all components of what is now the United States. The United States of America cannot and has never been able to cancel the title of sovereignties or authorities of American Indian peoples, ever, ever. Never, they will never, and they have never been extinguished. But in hoarding land and turning it into public by people who claim that the Indian land is their God-given right to take. And in the business of bringing millions of immigrants to the United States over many decades, making them feel like Indian land is a part of their American dream, the sovereignties of American Indian people, Native American peoples are made to be more and more invisible. So that when you watch a video of somebody crying about their land being stolen, you never ask, who really owns the land? On that note, in this document, Boudinot, again, the gentleman who's responding to the journalist, asserts that the United States has an absolute and unembarrassed title to every acre. That's his words. We have an absolute and unembarrassed title to every acre. Well, the fact is, the United States should be quite embarrassed by stealing Indian land. Also, the United States title to Indian land is not absolute, not by a long shot. These are incredible tensions, right? And I always leave this when I teach in my potential classes. These are the tensions, right? These are incredible tensions. Right? To help resolve them, there was work back then. To help resolve them, the United States began to enact what became the first American dream policies. In his letter on this map, and again, this is a really long letter. You can look it up on the Ocean Map Library website if you ever look at the details. Boudinot states that the lands in Oklahoma were, quote, as much for Negroes as for Indians, unquote. What energizes the United States of America to not return any land or admit that it has stolen Indian land is a very old, worn-out notion that the United States of America is a melting pot, that many people now pretentiously sort of label a nation of immigrants, in which the genocidal policies of America are ignored within hopefulness, within songs that we've seen as a child. This land is my land, this land is your land. Finish it for me. Sing it. All right, fast forward. This land was made for you and me. No, it wasn't. Absolutely wasn't. The United States of America is not a nation of immigrants. It was developed by stolen Indian land that must be retired. Again, that's the elephant in the room. It's not going away. Now, however, we are captured in an economy of affinity groups and sites of individualistic celebration of differences that are often used as distractions from the original American difference, the difference between indigenous peoples and everybody else. Consider the Old South Church in Boston, which in person and online covers itself in rainbow flags and celebrates Black life, LGBT life, the life of immigrants, the life of people that it seems marginal. The sign on the front door reads, and this isn't a picture of the church, this is a parade of people who attend the church. But I wanted a picture that kind of like maybe this regeneration. The sign on the front of the church, which is a rainbow colored flag, says, "Be the church, care for the poor, embrace diversity, reject racism." These are all good thoughts, right? Fight climate change, forgive often, love God, empower the powerless, get come on there, share earthly and spiritual resources, enjoy this life. So my question to you is, what was missing from the sign? I read to you everything that was on the sign. What was missing? For sake of time, I will tell you, return Indian land. This church, on their side, on the website, it's on the facade, the brick facade of the church, and you go there, right, there, they haven't added, and not to cheat them openly about it. They haven't added on the church, on the outside, our job is to return this land to American Indian people. America is in the middle of a political evolution from, I would argue, the American dream to a DEI infrastructure from within which the same harm is done. Now, I'm not pro DeSantis in Florida, and I'm not one of those people that are like, by definition, conservative and anti-DEI. That's not the position I come from. But what we're enduring right now is increasingly a DEI infrastructure that does the same harm as different infrastructures of sort of the American dream that preceded it. But now, through heartfelt stories of people who profit from colonial occupation of American Indian lands, waters, and spaces. Fox News, interestingly, during the recent Democratic National Convention, called everyone out on this. One of the journalists said, quote, the Democrats acknowledge land theft. They want to give land acknowledgements, but they don't even talk about how they're returning the land. Oh, the hypocrisy. And they were right. Everybody, whether they say that land is theirs and they can have it, or they say, oh, you know what? We're going to do a land acknowledgement. Nobody's returning the land. Why? Like in Boudinot's letter that I was just showing you all ago, American Indians are still treated like wild humans who need to be corralled. American Indians are not humanized like black peoples, white peoples, or other peoples who immigrated to the United States and who have immigrated to the United States. In 2022, when Harvard discovered that it had over a dozen black bodies in its museum, the bodies of former slaves, its president declared that it would properly bury those black peoples, mentioning nothing about returning hundreds and thousands of American Indian bodies and peoples and ancestors that are largely still in the Peabody and in other museums across the United States, in departments of anthropology, museums of anthropology. In recent seasons within the National Football League, there has been a bit of controversy over whether the Black National Anthem should have been performed inside the stadium before the game. And I'm not really concerned about that debate. Rather, I want to point out the fact that Black humanity is celebrated in the stadium, clothed in the humanity of American Indian. And it's funny, Patrick Mahomes, as a Black man, stands before audiences with an arrowhead and the name Chiefs on his body, and he's asked about what it means to be a Black quarterback. And I'm sitting here like, this is frustrating. How is he clothed in our inhumanity talking about his humanity? That makes no sense. As all of this is happening, as American Indians stand on the streets outside of, for example, the last 2 or 3 Super Bowls, loudly asking, with shirts like this, asking for their humanity to be acknowledged and celebrated. So here, as I kind of wrap up almost, what do you all here at Andover have to do? What is your responsibility? What is your obligation? You must begin to understand and eliminate processes and programs that by definition it varies non-Indian people, not American people, with sense of cause, as they play games and otherwise live their lives and seek the American dream. Again, these are students that are from other nations. These are students that their families have been in America for 200 or 300 years, but they're not American. Why are students and faculty and administrators to come? This was the spirit of the letter by anthropologist and Ojibwe community member David Schreier a few years ago when he wrote an essay about the need to return national parks to American Indian tribal nations. He writes, quote, the national parks are sometimes called America's best idea, and there is much to recommend them. They are indeed awesome places worthy of reverence and preservation. As Native Americans like me would be the first to tell you, but all of them were founded. All these national parks were founded on land that was once ours. And many were created only after we were removed forcibly, sometimes by an invading army and other times following a treaty we signed under duress. When describing the simultaneous creation of the parks and Native American reservations, the Oglala spiritual leader Black Elk noted darkly that the United States, quote, made little islands for us and other little islands for the four-legged and always new patterns of becoming small. Schreier's conversation in this article was not just about national parks, but it used national parks as a particularly powerful angle to begin to ask, when is enough enough? When it comes to colonial occupation, the treatment of American Indians as hunted things and as pets, as mascots. The recent Indian Country Today article asserted something that I've been lecturing on for years. American Indians are murdered by police at rates higher than any other racial ethnic group, any other ethnic racial group, every other ethnic racial group. This process of hunting American Indian Native American people often occurs in the enactment of legal processes to harm us, American Indians, and withholding of legal processes to protect inherent sovereign rights of American Indian peoples to our spaces and our bodies. Up in Maine, which is where I teach. Up in Maine, the Wabanaki Confederacy is in the middle of a centuries-long fight to protect water and ecology. See, for example, a story from the Associated Press about the appeals of Penobscot leaders to the United States Supreme Court, which has the Supreme Court has no American Indian Native American peoples. Guess what the Supreme Court does have, though? Men and women who are white, Latino, Black, and that's it. But historically, never, ever has there been American Indian on the Supreme Court. So the Penobscot was asking then that court that doesn't represent Native people for protection of the sovereignty and control of the Penobscot River. You might say that none of the people on the Supreme Court have had any relationships with American Indian indigenous peoples. Rather, they're all products of a world in which a colonial system of teaching and training and policy creation, which by definition aims to destroy indigenous native ownership of land, water, and other relationships to what we now call the United States, sets up the conditions within which the United States can continue. Can you play the audio of Janet Mills really quickly? Here, Janet Mills, the governor of Maine, takes a personal interest in putting the Wabanaki people in their place. When she vetoed LD 2004, which is a law in Maine, a proposal law in 2004, which would have returned the state of Maine to the position of fully recognizing the sovereignties of the 5 Wabanaki tribal nations. Mills posted a snarky maternalistic letter on her website and home news.
Hello, this is Governor Janet Mills, and thank you for listening. I care for the health, welfare, opportunity, prosperity, and future of the Wabanaki people, just as I care for every Maine person. And that's why I signed into law several very important tribal bills this week. I signed into law the historic Micmac Restoration Act to extend to the Micmac Nation the same rights and benefits enjoyed by other Wabanaki nations in Maine. I signed into law the Maine Indian Child Welfare Act to preserve the rights of Indian families during custody and child welfare proceedings involving Indian children. And I signed into law an act regarding the Maine Indian Tribal State Commission to improve the functioning of the commission at the request of the tribes and legislative leadership. I share the goal of ensuring the Wabanaki nations can access benefits that are generally available to other federally recognized tribes. Unfortunately, I do not believe that LD 2004, recently enacted by the legislature, will achieve that goal. I fear it would result in years, if not decades, of new, painful, complex litigation that would only further divide the state and our people. And that is why last week I vetoed that bill. Under the Maine Indian Claims Settlement Act of 1980, negotiated by the tribes, the state, and the federal government, the Maine tribes received more than $80 million in federal funding to acquire up to 300,000 acres of land, about the size of Andros County. Recognizing that that land, when bought, would likely be spread out all across the state of Maine asked that the parcels remain under state law to avoid a confusing patchwork of laws statewide. And the tribes agreed. Under the Settlement Act, the tribes became eligible for all federal benefits and services afforded to other tribes. The only exception was a very few number of laws that might conflict directly with Maine laws, just a handful. As a result, Maine tribes receive a lot of federal money, more than $420 million just since 2019. They also receive state funds, education funding, revenue sharing, general assistance, and money from the Oxford Casino, funds that other tribes across this nation do not receive. But instead of specifically addressing the very few federal laws that do not now apply to the Wabanaki nations, LD 2004 attempted to upend the 1980 agreement wholesale. LD 2004 would repeal a broad swath of unnamed, unidentified state laws on tribal territory, lands that they now hold or might later acquire anywhere in the state of Maine. Laws that could regulate things like fish and game, water quality and land use, fire safety and building standards, education requirements, labor and unemployment laws. This would create a situation where people would not know what laws are in effect in any particular place in Maine. Only way to solve those questions would be by very contentious and lengthy lawsuits. By removing any state or local regulatory authority, this bill would transfer the authority of tribal lands to the federal government, putting the feds in charge. Well, don't we think that the turmoil that the federal government just put Maine lobstermen through with its right whale regulations is a pretty good example of why we shouldn't leave the feds in charge. And maybe the most alarming part of this situation is that if this bill were to take effect with all these unintended consequences, the Maine legislature could not simply come back and fix them in the next session or later sessions on their own. They'd have to get the agreement of all 4 tribes. It's in effect a binding contract and in effect irreversible. That's a high stakes proposition for all the 1.3 million citizens of Maine, especially since they didn't even have a chance to understand the complex bill. After all, the final language was printed the same day it was voted on in both the House and Senate. You know, like any politician, I could just stick my finger in the air to see which way the wind was blowing, and I could sign this bill and make a lot of people happy. But that would not be the responsible thing to do. Not doing my job as governor. I vetoed LD 2004 because I know that we can deliver the promise of greater benefits for tribal communities while avoiding the confusion and litigation that bill would cause. I want to focus on the specific problems and the specific federal laws that tribes may not be benefiting from, and work together with them and Maine's congressional delegation, and make those laws apply where we think they make sense. The state and the tribes have made historic progress these last 8.5 years, more than under any governor in the last 40 years.
The fact is, most of those 1.3 million citizens that she referenced that shouldn't be made uncomfortable are on lands that they shouldn't originally, their family shouldn't originally occupy, stolen Indian land. Maine is a state that should not exist because it was stolen Indian land and because it was in Massachusetts, which is a whole different conversation. With those facts in hand, the governor of Maine should, I would argue, remove herself from policing benefits and happiness and dictating what the federal government should or should not do in a relationship with the tribes of Maine. They're federally recognized, they have sovereign to sovereign relationships with the federal government, and per the standard protocol with federally recognized tribes, they should be able to do a lot of things that now, in the current state of politics in Maine, via the 1980 Indian Land Settlement Act, they can't do. Governor Mills, in her colonizer sort of identity, has blood on her hands. Her decisions to not allow Wabanaki people to fully control things like the health of the river, the health of the colonies more generally, how healthcare is accessed and distributed within Maine, is actually creating situations where Wabanaki peoples don't access healthcare, for example, and they die early deaths, sometimes 20 or 25 years earlier than other citizens of Maine. As Wabanaki peoples are kept from protecting their waters, health, and relationships to space, they are victim of the governor's pen, pushed firmly into their political tribal arteries. Again, in this moment, as you're looking at your kind of website that lists like former leaders, and there's the motto up here, finesse originated pendant, and depends upon the beginning. In this moment, what do you at Phillips Academy and the folks within Andover do? You're educating future lawyers, which is what Janet Mills was, judges, healthcare providers, and perhaps sports stars. I heard it was a baseball players. How are they made responsible to their places in the suppression of American Indian peoples? In many ways, you, people in this room, have covered up the tension with your school's assertion that you are international and diverse more generally. You herald various types of diversity and inclusion that have made your campus humanistically dynamic, and you become famous for it. However, the scaffolding of Phillips Academy's education, indeed the work of all people of England, ought to be the remembering and the remattering of American Indian Native Americans for our nations. The state flag of Massachusetts celebrates the genocide that birthed the treacherous Commonwealth that we're building now. And if you don't know about the state flag, very quickly, it's an American Indian man, and over the top of the American Indian man, there is a sword with an arm attached to the sword, and the assumption that was supposed to make it that the sword is coming down to behead the American Indian man. As a school that sits in the shadow of that flag, your political mission ought to be to dismantle the fantasy shrouded histories that make it seem like your community was built out of goodness. Their motto, and this originated in it, and depends on the beginning. This beginning is not arbitrary. It is stolen. Indian land in particular, stolen Massachusetts land. The same land that helped support your over $1 billion in endowment. The same land that was stolen through the biological warfare of George Washington, one of your early supporters. The wealth of George Washington, which helped spur his support of multiple nephews here in the so was retained through the work of him and his father to burn down Mohawk and other American towns throughout the 18th century. In fact, that's what the Mohawks still call George Washington, and they refer to him, town burn. As George lauded the beauty of Andover in his letters of peace and the stability and the normalcy of his time, his business was genocide and the creation of chaos and trauma in Indian towns and communities across the United States as it existed back then. As such, your students, you all in the room, from the very first steps into this academy, you should understand several things. One, you're undergoing or should be undergoing a process of indigenous return. Return of sacred names and this museum to Indian people, for example, which I think is already happening. Return of this space and place, for example, in the form of rights of return to Massachusetts peoples. Two, that there should be this understanding that you as students are part of this community that is eager for you all to understand Andover and Boston, Massachusetts much more clearly. As a giant facade, historically, that you don't want to learn necessarily with, kind of against. For example, I would suggest that you all should form a school seminar, one that stretches throughout the entire year, that can be a conversation with the people who plan on the Massachusetts College. Again, you have over $1 billion, right? Pay these people that often haven't gotten your policies and your academic and pedagogical pursuits. But meanwhile, teach the beautiful students in this room not to take a tour of Boston with a sense of, I'm touring Boston, it's exciting. But to begin to understand Boston as the center of genocidal policy. How many people have been to Boston Common? What was Boston Common originally created for? Does anybody know? Quickly, off the cuff. What was Boston Common created for? It was created as hanging grounds for American Indian peoples from Maine to Rhode Island who were brought into Boston and tried. Literally was a pillow in the middle of the park. It's a hanging ground. And lastly, as I wind up, meanwhile, each student not to take it to in this kind of general kind of common sense way, but relevant to kind of involved, which was with a sense of clarity and wanting to develop clarity. And thirdly, understand that attending Phillips Academy means that you ought to place pressure on the universities that you will most of you may be attending to do the same. The people who guide this school ought to be a siphon into the Ivy League, for example. They ought to be a guide to returning stolen Ivy League land. Every university should hear students writing essays from this school that announce their lives, their careers, and callings are dedicated to these missions and these visions. This is a new human rights, not just a civil rights, this is a new human rights movement. It was one that Martin Luther King couldn't quite guide. It is one that Abraham Lincoln, who in his slavery and many ways tried to apply. It is what you here at the Phillips Andover Academy are responsible to. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
David, thanks very much. And I have some people have to go, but if folks now have questions about continuing the conversation.